Has someone you love ever simply vanished? Not in death, not in goodbye, but in silence, leaving behind nothing but a question that follows you into every quiet room, every sleepless hour, every moment when the world goes still enough for you to hear your own heartbeat. If you have ever loved someone and then lost them to the kind of disappearance that has no explanation, no farewell, no closure of any kind, then what you are about to hear is not just someone else's story. It is the story of every person who has ever sat in the dark at 2 in the morning, staring at a phone screen, wondering whether to send a message to someone who may no longer be on the other side. By the end of what you are about to hear, you will understand why a man living thousands of miles from home swore an oath on his mother's soul to find his brother, and why a single cup of coffee, a corn cob, and a crumpled 50,000 dong bill may be the last thread connecting a family to someone they have been searching for across 16 years of silence. Stay with this story. It matters more than you know. There is a particular kind of grief that the world does not have a proper name for. It is not the grief of losing someone to death, because death, as brutal as it is, gives you something to hold on to. A grave, a date, a final word, even if that word was spoken without knowing it would be the last. The grief that Thang carries is different. It is the grief of not knowing. It is the grief of a question that sits in the center of every day, like a stone you cannot move, cannot walk around, and cannot stop feeling beneath your feet. His name is Mai Ton Thang, and he lives in Austria now, far from the city of Saigon where he was born, far from the neighborhood of Bin Then where the story he carries began, far from the 7 brothers and sisters he grew up alongside in a home that was loud and crowded and full, in the way that only large families can be full. He works, he goes about his days. He has built a life in a country whose language he learned late, whose winters still surprise him sometimes with their particular brand of cold, a cold that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with distance from everything familiar. But every night, no matter where he is or what the day has asked of him, Thang finds himself in the same place, lying awake, thinking about Duong. Mayang Duong is Thang's older brother. He was the 6th of 8 children, born in 1973, which means that if you are hearing this story in the year we are living in now, he would be 53 years old. He was tall by the family's account, handsome, the kind of man people noticed when he walked into a room, not because of anything he did to draw attention, but because of the way he carried himself. With a quiet confidence that spoke of intelligence, of experience, of a life that had been examined and understood rather than simply lived. He had a distinctive brow, dark and expressive, and beneath his right eyebrow a mole, not large, not obvious, but there unmistakably if you looked closely enough. He had been married once to a woman named Nga in Vung Tau. That marriage ended. He had a son from that marriage, a boy named Mai Min Hoang, who would be around 26 years old now, living somewhere in Saigon. The boy grew up without his father. That is its own story, its own wound. But the wound that concerns us here, the wound that brought Thang to make his oath, began not with divorce and not with estrangement between father and son, but with something quieter, something that accumulated slowly over years until one summer morning in 2010, Duong simply was not there anymore. It is important to understand what the summer of 2010 meant for a man like Mayang Duong. He had not arrived at that summer easily. The years leading up to it had been difficult in the way that years can be difficult when circumstances pile on top of one another without pause. Financial strain that becomes debt, debt that becomes a kind of psychological weight that reshapes how you see every morning when you wake up, health that begins to slip in ways that are hard to explain to people who have not felt it, the particular isolation of a man who was once capable and confident, and who now finds himself unable to locate the version of himself that knew what to do next. He was staying with his eldest brother in the Bin Then district of Saigon in those final weeks. And then one day he was not staying anywhere anyone knew about. He was simply gone. 16 years. Thang has done the math so many times that the number has lost its weight as a number and become instead a feeling, a texture, a color. 16 years of birthdays, without knowing whether his brother had one to celebrate. 16 Tet festivals where the family gathered and ate and tried to be present with each other while the absence at the table made everything taste a little less like what it was supposed to taste like. 16 years of his mother's death, she and their father both gone now, 2 decades past, without being able to tell Duong, without knowing if Duong knew, without being able to stand beside his brother at the grave of the woman who gave them both life. There is something Thang said, and it bears sitting with for a moment before we move forward. He said that from the day Duong disappeared, the family has never had a moment of joy that was truly complete. He did not say they have not had joy. He said the joy is never whole. There is always a piece missing, a hollow at the center of every celebration, every reunion, every moment of happiness. Because happiness shared among people who love each other is incomplete when one of those people is unaccounted for. Not dead, not confirmed gone, simply absent. Simply somewhere unknown, living a life no one can see or reach or touch. Thang described lying awake past 2 in the morning, sending messages to his brother's phone, a number that may no longer belong to anyone, a number that may ring into a void, a number that Thang dials anyway, because dialing it is the only way he knows to tell Duong that he is still being thought of, still being missed, still being held in the prayers of a man who swore on the soul of their mother that he would not stop looking. That oath matters. It is not a metaphor, and it is not a performance. In the tradition Thang comes from, swearing on the soul of a parent who has passed is the most binding promise a person can make. It is more than a legal contract. It is more than a public declaration. It reaches into the space between the living and the dead and asks both worlds to hold you accountable. When Thang said those words, "I swear on my honor and on the soul of our mother," he was not speaking to an audience. He was speaking to the universe. He was making a commitment that he understood could not be undone. He offered a reward of at minimum 1 billion Vietnamese dong. He was careful to say at minimum because the point was never the money. The point was to communicate, in the most concrete language available to him, the seriousness of his desire, the depth of his need, the fact that this is not a casual inquiry. This is a man who has spent 16 years in a particular kind of pain, and who would give everything he has to end it. Let us go back further. Let us go back to before the summer of 2010, before the disappearance, before the debt and the illness and the loss of direction that preceded Duong's vanishing. Let us go back to when Thang and Duong were young, when the family was whole, and the world had not yet made its full demands on any of them. 8 children in a Vietnamese household is a different kind of mathematics than most people outside that tradition understand. It is not simply 8 individuals who happen to share a last name. It is 8 personalities, 8 futures, 8 sources of noise and laughter and conflict and tenderness, all compressed into a space that requires everyone to negotiate with everyone else constantly. You learn in that environment to read people. You learn which sibling needs space and which one needs to be pulled closer. You learn whose silence is peace and whose silence is a warning. You learn the specific rhythm of each person's breathing when they are asleep, because you have slept in the same room with them for years. Thang knew Duong the way you can only know someone when you have shared every meal, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday with them for decades. He knew the way Duong laughed. He knew the way Duong walked into a room. He knew the look on his brother's face when something genuinely delighted him, and he knew the look on his brother's face when something was wrong, even when Duong was trying not to show that anything was wrong, because Duong was, by all accounts, a man who kept his interior struggles largely to himself. That quality, the self-containment, the privacy of his suffering, may be one of the reasons why no one knew how bad things had gotten until after he was gone. The people who love someone like that often blame themselves afterward. They replay conversations, searching for the moment when they could have said something different, asked something more directly, crossed the invisible line that the proud person draws around their own pain. Thang has likely replayed those conversations many times. It is the kind of thing you cannot stop doing, even when you know that the replaying does not change anything. What Thang carries, in addition to the grief and the uncertainty, is the particular burden of love that has nowhere to go. Because love does not stop when the person you love disappears. It does not redirect itself, does not find another outlet, does not diminish proportionally with the years of absence. It keeps accumulating. It sits in the chest and grows heavier with each passing season, until the weight of it becomes its own physical sensation, something you feel in your body as clearly as hunger or cold. 2 in the morning. A message typed and sent to a phone number that may belong to no one. Or may belong to a man sitting somewhere in Saigon, or somewhere in Vietnam, or somewhere in the world, who has not looked at his old phone in years, or who no longer remembers who Thang is, or who remembers perfectly and cannot bring himself to respond. The cruelty of not knowing which of these is true is the thing that makes it hardest. And yet Thang keeps sending the messages. Because stopping would mean accepting a conclusion he has not been given enough evidence to accept. And because their mother asked them, the way mothers do without ever using those exact words, to take care of each other. And because a promise made on a soul does not expire. There is something important to understand about the way that Thang described the last confirmed sightings of his brother, the last threads of evidence that Duong was somewhere in Saigon, alive, living a reduced life, but living nonetheless. It is important because it tells us something not just about where Duong might be, but about who Duong is, even now. Even after 16 years of whatever those years have held for him. People who had encountered a man they believed to be Duong described him as well-dressed, polite, dignified in his bearing. Even in circumstances that most people would consider humbling, accepting credit for a coffee at a small neighborhood shop, relying on someone else to settle his tab, the man they described behaved with self-respect. He was not broken in the way the world sometimes breaks people who have lost everything. He was reduced, perhaps. He was struggling, perhaps. But he had not lost the quality that Thang described in his brother, the intelligence, the bearing, the sense that there was still a person inside the circumstances, not just a body surviving them. That detail matters. It is a clue not just to Duong's location but to his character. And it is a detail that, if Duong is somewhere hearing this or reading this, we hope reaches him. Because the message it carries is this: the people who love you see you the way you were, and they see you the way you still are, and neither version is a source of shame. The coffee shop in District 12. The year approximately 2023. A man with a distinctive brow and what might have been a mole beneath his right eye, who ordered on credit, who was known by the owner in the way that regulars are known, not as a friend exactly, but as a presence, a person whose face you learn to expect. And then the last time. A man slightly unsteady, holding a corn cob in one hand and money in the other. The shop owner called out to him. He turned. He pressed 50,000 dong into her hand and walked away before she could give it back. She took the money, and then she realized, and she called after him. But he was already gone. She has carried that moment with her ever since. The 50,000 dong, the corn cob. The turned back of a man walking away from someone who, if she had known, would have held on to him instead. The question that sits at the end of all of this, the question that Thang asks himself every night past 2 in the morning, is not a complicated question. It is the simplest question in the world. It is the question that anyone who has ever loved someone and lost them to silence knows by heart. Are you still out there, Duong? And if you are, do you know that someone is still looking? But 3 days after Thang's appeal reached the world, a woman in District 12 picked up her phone and dialed a number. And what she said when the call connected changed everything. Anyone thought they knew about where to look. She almost did not make the call. That is the detail that stays with you when you sit with this story long enough. The woman in District 12, the owner of the small coffee shop, the one who had known the man with the distinctive brow, the one who had taken the 50,000 dong, and then immediately wished she had not. She had watched the video once, and then walked away from her phone. She had told herself it was probably not the same person. She had told herself that Saigon is a city of 10 million people, and men with dark brows and quiet manners are not so rare that one sighting means anything. She had talked herself out of it, the way people talk themselves out of things when the responsibility of being right feels heavier than the comfort of staying silent. But then she watched the video again, and she watched it a third time. There is something that happens when you see a face you recognize in a context that surprises you. It is not a gradual recognition. It does not build slowly like understanding a difficult sentence. It arrives all at once, like a light switching on in a room you thought was empty, and once it arrives you cannot unfeel it. She kept looking at the image Thang had provided, the photograph of Duong from years ago, younger, healthier, the face of a man who had not yet walked into the summer of 2010, and she kept seeing the overlap. The brow, the set of the jaw. Something about the way the face held itself, even in a still photograph, some quality of self-containment, that she recognized from the man who used to sit at one of her small tables and drink his coffee quietly and cause no trouble, and ask for nothing except a little more time to pay. She picked up the phone, she dialed. And when the call connected, she said, almost before she could stop herself, that she thought she knew where he had been. Not where he was now, where he had been. That distinction matters, and it is a distinction that anyone searching for someone who does not wish to be found, or who has become lost even to themselves, understands is the difference between hope and false hope. She could not say he was still in the same neighborhood. She could not say he was still frequenting the same streets. She had not seen him since the day of the corn cob and the 50,000 dong. But she could say that for a period of time in 2023, a man whose face matched the face in the photograph had moved through her world, had been real and present and alive, had drunk coffee and exchanged small words, and conducted himself with the dignity of a person who still knew who he was, even if the world around him had lost the thread of that knowledge. She told the whole story. It came out in the way stories come out when you have been sitting on them and the release valve finally opens, not in a clean, organized sequence, but in the order that the emotions arrived, which is its own kind of truth. The credit he ran up. The person who used to transfer money to cover his tab, someone she could not name now because she had changed bank accounts and lost the trail. The Zallo contact she had added and then deleted when she changed phones. The small losses of connection that accumulate, each one seeming minor at the time, each one now feeling like a door closed in the wrong moment. And then the last day. She described it carefully, because she had replayed it so many times that the details had sharpened rather than faded. The way the details of moments we regret tend to do. He had been unsteady, not falling down unsteady, not dangerous. But the kind of unsteady that tells you a person has had something to drink and is carrying more than alcohol in their body, carrying exhaustion maybe, or hopelessness, or the particular heaviness of a day that did not go the way it needed to. He was holding a corn cob, one of those simple grilled corn cobs that cost almost nothing and fill you up when nothing else is available. In his other hand, money. She called his name, or what she knew of his name, which may have been a name he had given her, or a name others had used. The details of this are not fully clear. He turned. And there was a moment, she said, a brief moment, where he looked at her with the kind of clarity that cuts through whatever fog had settled around him, and he pressed the 50,000 dong into her hand with the deliberate care of a man who wanted very much to pay his debts. She took it, instinct, the reflexive acceptance of a small transaction, the muscle memory of 1,000 similar exchanges. And then he walked away. She called after him. She held the money out. She told him to take it back, that he should keep it, that she did not need it. But he had already turned the corner. He was already gone, and she has not seen him since. And the money, 50,000 dong, the equivalent of almost nothing in any currency, the cost of a small meal, a bus fare, a few minutes of relief, has sat in her memory ever since as a symbol of something she cannot quite name. The pride of a man who had almost nothing. The dignity of someone who still understood the importance of settling what he owed. the unbearable smallness of what separated her from holding on and letting go. She told all of this to the person on the other end of the phone. She was careful to say she was not certain. She was careful to say the similarity could be coincidence. She was not calling for the reward. She said this plainly, without drama, in the way that people say true things. She was calling because she had seen a family's pain expressed in a video on a screen, and she had recognized something in it, and she could not go on with her day pretending she had not. The person who received her call treated it with appropriate caution. This is important. Not every lead is a confirmation. Not every resemblance is an identity. The history of families searching for missing people is full of moments when hope arrived dressed as certainty and turned out to be neither. A responsible approach to this kind of information means holding it at a measured distance while still taking it seriously enough to share it. Because the alternative, silence, out of fear of being wrong, helps no one. The neighborhood in District 12. The approximate time frame of 2023. The description of a man who matched in multiple significant details the image and the character of Myung Duong as his family knew him. These are not conclusions, they are coordinates. They are the narrowing of a search from an entire country to a few streets, from an entire decade to a specific year, from an idea of a person to something closer to an actual location. And somewhere in Saigon, or somewhere beyond Saigon, we cannot say for certain. There is a man who is 53 years old, who has a mole beneath his right eyebrow, who carries himself with a dignity that poverty and years of difficulty have not fully extinguished, who once pressed 50,000 dong into a woman's hand as if it were the most important thing he did that day. And perhaps it was. Perhaps in the life he is living now, small acts of honor are the things that hold the self together when everything else has come loose. This is the moment where it becomes necessary to speak about what it costs someone like Duong to disappear. Not the cost to the people left behind. We have already sat with Thang's grief, already understood what 16 years of not knowing feels like from the outside of the absence. But the cost to the person who disappears. Because disappearing is not painless. It is not a clean break. It is not relief, not really. Not for a person who has a mole beneath his right eyebrow, and 3 brothers and sisters scattered across countries, and a son named Min Hoang, who grew up in Saigon not knowing where his father went. When a person vanishes from their own life, they carry that life with them. They carry the faces of the people they left. They carry the holidays missed, the conversations not had, the ordinary moments that were stolen from both sides of the absence. They carry it whether they acknowledge it or not, whether the weight of it is visible to strangers or hidden beneath the dignity of a pressed 50,000 dong and a carefully maintained exterior. And they wonder, sometimes, perhaps often, perhaps in the hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the city quiets down enough to hear your own thoughts, whether anyone is still looking. Thang is still looking. That message has now traveled from Austria to the internet to a coffee shop in District 12, to the ears of a woman who recognized a face. It is traveling further with every person who hears this story. It is traveling in the direction of a man who may or may not know it is coming. There is a question that lives inside every search like this, a question that the searchers ask themselves quietly and almost never say out loud, because saying it out loud makes it too real to carry. The question is not whether the missing person is alive. The question is whether the missing person, if found, will want to be found. Thang addressed this. He did not avoid it. He said the reunion, if it comes, is not about accusation. It is not about blame. It is not about the 16 years of pain that Duong's absence has caused, or the incomplete joy of every celebration, or the sleepless nights, or the oath sworn on a dead mother's soul. It is about one thing, knowing, just knowing. Knowing that Duong is alive and somewhere, and that the thread between them, that thread that a mother tied by bringing 8 children into the world and teaching them, without using those exact words, to belong to each other, has not been cut, just stretched. just stretched across 16 years and thousands of kilometers and all the silence that accumulated in between. Thang has made his peace, or as much peace as a person can make, with the possibility that Duong may have reasons for his disappearance that are not about the family at all, that the illness, the financial ruin, the psychological weight that broke something open in him in the summer of 2010, these may have created a version of Duong that is genuinely different from the tall, handsome, intelligent man in the photograph. That what Duong needs may not be a reunion but something simpler. To know that the people who love him still love him. To know that the door is open. To know that if he ever decides to walk through it, there will be no interrogation, no performance of shame, no requirement to explain or justify 16 years of silence to a family that simply wants him back. The woman in District 12 tried to go back to the places where she used to see him. She walked the streets of the neighborhood, looking for a face she had trained herself to recognize over months of small transactions and polite exchanges. She did not find him. But she kept looking. The way people keep looking when the looking feels like the only thing they can offer. And somewhere, possibly, a man with a mole beneath his right eyebrow is holding a corn cob, or a cup of coffee, or nothing at all, and wondering whether the weight he has been carrying has any end. But what neither Thang nor the woman in District 12 knew, what no one in this story knew until the day the search expanded beyond the borders of one family's grief, is that Myong Duong is not the only person in Vietnam whose family has been fractured by disappearance, by war, by the slow erosion of circumstances that pulls people away from the people who need them most. And one of those other stories is already threading itself into this one, from a direction no one expected, carrying a photograph that has been waiting 50 years to find the right pair of eyes. In a small house in Hoc Mon, on the outskirts of Saigon, there is a window. It faces east, which means that in the early morning, before the city has fully committed to its noise, the light comes through it in a particular way, soft and golden and slightly hesitant, the way light behaves when it is not yet sure it is welcome. An old woman sits beside this window every morning. Her name is Nguyen Thi Hong Dao, and she is 74 years old, and she has been sitting beside this window in one form or another for more than half a century. Not always this window, not always this house, but always the posture, always the looking. Always the specific quality of attention that belongs to a person who is waiting for something they are not certain will ever arrive. In her hands, when she sits, there is a photograph. It is a black and white photograph, worn at the edges in the way that photographs become worn when they have been handled 10,000 times by hands that could not put them down. The photograph shows a group of children. Among them, one face is marked with a small arrow. Someone drew it there years ago to identify a specific child among the others. The child has a face that is different from the faces around him. Softer in some features, more angular in others. The face of a child who carries two worlds in his bones without knowing it yet. The face of a boy named Than Tung. Badao points to that face every time she looks at the photograph. She does not need the arrow. She would know him anywhere. She has known him for 55 years, which is how long it has been since she held him. Since she made the decision that she has never stopped second-guessing. Since she placed him in the care of strangers because she believed, in the desperation of that moment, that strangers could give him something she could not. She was 17 years old when she left her home province of Quang Ngai to work as a kitchen helper at an American military base in Cam Ranh, Can Hoa. It was 1968, and the world was arranged in a way that none of the people living inside it had chosen. She met a young American soldier there. She remembers his name as something like Kisdor, though the sounds of another language filtered through memory across half a century become uncertain things. He sat at the gate and recorded the names of the Americans who came and went. She moved through that gate every day. Over time, in the way that proximity and youth and the particular loneliness of wartime create conditions that ordinary life does not, they found each other. Her daughter, Kim Thi, described it later with a phrase that made Badao's eyes briefly light up. She said it was like dry straw and fire, that eventually the proximity ignites something. And Badao, hearing this, simply nodded. Yes, something like that. Something like warmth in a cold world. Something like being seen by another person when the circumstances around you are doing everything they can to make you feel invisible. In 1969, the soldier left Vietnam. He was going home. The war had made its demands and then released him, the way wars release soldiers. Not cleanly, not without cost, but release them nonetheless. They spent one final night together before his departure. Neither of them knew what that night would mean. How could they? You cannot know, in the middle of a moment, what the moment is planting. Badao discovered she was pregnant after he was gone. There was no way to reach him. There was no address, no reliable communication, no infrastructure for a Vietnamese kitchen helper to send word across the Pacific to a soldier, returning to a life she knew nothing about. She was alone with the knowledge, and then she was alone with the child. She named him Nguyen Thanh Tung. She loved him for the months she had him. And then, a decision that was not made from lack of love, but from the particular anguish of a young woman with no resources and no support, and a world that was not arranged to help people in her situation, she brought him to an orphanage in Saigon. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she would come back when things were better. She told herself that a place with proper care and food and safety was a gift she was giving him, not an abandonment. 3 months later, she returned. The nuns would not let her see him. The reason they gave was unclear, a bureaucratic refusal delivered without explanation, and she stood on the other side of a door, with her arms empty, and her chest full of something that has never fully dissolved in the 55 years since. After 1975, she went back again. The children had been taken away, she was told. All of them. No one knew where. She rebuilt her life the way people rebuild lives after loss, not by replacing what was lost, but by continuing to live around the shape of it. She married. She had 7 more children. She found joy in those children, real joy, the kind that is not diminished by the existence of grief elsewhere in the heart. But she never stopped looking at the photograph. She never stopped saying the name. And when a man named Paris Bouza arrived in Saigon in 2024, carrying a black and white photograph he had found while clearing out his late mother's home, Badao was called to come and look. His mother had been the woman who carried Vietnamese orphans to America in 1975. She had died in a fire, trying to save one of those children. Her son had grown up with the photograph without knowing the story behind the faces in it. When he found it, he brought it back. He did not know why exactly. It was the kind of gesture that does not always have a clear explanation, the kind of thing people do when they feel the pull of something unfinished. On the back of the photograph, written in French, were 2 names for the same child. The name before baptism, Thanh Tung. The name after, Baptiste Francoise Phi Hung. Badao looked at the photograph. She looked at the faces. And without hesitation, without uncertainty, without needing the arrow that someone had drawn to mark one child among the others, she placed her finger on a face and said, "That one. That is my son. That is Thanh Tung." And then she wept. Not the weeping of a person performing grief for an audience. The weeping of a body that has been holding something for 55 years and has finally, in the presence of a piece of paper with a name written on the back, been given permission to let a small portion of it go. Kim Thi, her daughter, has been searching alongside her mother for years. She has sent her mother's DNA to laboratories in the United States that specialize in connecting families separated by adoption and migration. She has posted on forums, reached out to organizations that help Vietnamese American children of war find their origins. She has done all of this quietly, persistently, in the way that daughters do things for mothers who cannot fully do them for themselves anymore. Not out of obligation, out of love. Out of the understanding that her mother's unfinished story is also her own unfinished story, that the brother she never met is still, in some sense, her brother, a person with a face she knows from a photograph, a name she has spoken aloud in hope, a life that went somewhere she cannot see. If Thon Tung is alive today, he is somewhere past the age of 55. He may be in America. He may be in France, given the name written on the back of the photograph, Baptiste François Phi Hung, a name that carries the unmistakable shape of a French Catholic baptism. He may be living under a name entirely different from any name Badao gave him or the nuns recorded. He may have a family of his own, children, grandchildren perhaps, people who know him by a name and a history that has no visible connection to a small house in Hoc Mon and an old woman who sits beside an east-facing window every morning with a worn photograph in her hands. He may not know she exists. That is the hardest part of this particular version of the story. Not the searching, not the years of unanswered questions. The hardest part is the possibility that Thon Tung has built a complete life. A good life. A life in which the question of origin was either answered long ago in a way that satisfied him, or set aside as unanswerable and therefore not worth the suffering of pursuit. The possibility that he does not know there is a 74-year-old woman in Saigon who points to his face in a photograph every morning and calls his name. And yet Badao sits by the window. And yet Kim Thi keeps sending the DNA samples, keeps posting on the forums, keeps doing the quiet, persistent work of someone who believes that the world is small enough and connected enough and full enough of small miracles that one morning the right person will see the right image at the right moment and recognize something, a face, a name, a date, a detail that changes everything. This is what connects these stories that we have been carrying together through this hour. Thang in Austria, awake past 2 in the morning, sending messages to a phone number that may ring into nothing. Badao in Hoc Mon sitting by a window with a photograph. Kim Thi doing the invisible labor of hope on behalf of her mother. The woman in District 12 who walked back through her old neighborhood looking for a face she had only just realized she should have held on to. What connects them is not grief, though grief is present in all of them. What connects them is the refusal to accept that love has an expiration date. The insistence, quiet and stubborn and sometimes exhausting, that the people we love continue to matter even when the world has arranged things in ways that separate us from them. That a mother's love for a child she held for 3 months and then lost across 55 years of silence is still a real love, still a living love, still a love that deserves to find its object. There is a young man in this story too, though his part of it is quieter. Robin, 27 years old, born in Vietnam with 2 small holes in his heart and a dangerous degree of malnutrition, adopted at 6 months old by a British couple named Julia and her husband, raised in Brighton alongside 3 sisters who were also adopted, also from other countries, also navigating the particular complexity of growing up in a body that carries one story while living inside another. He traveled to Vietnam at the end of 2025 with his girlfriend and his adoptive parents, and he walked from one end of the country to the other. Not literally, but in spirit, in commitment, in the willingness to keep going, even when the search felt like it might not lead anywhere. And then his birth mother walked into a room. He knew her immediately. He could not explain how except to call it instinct, the kind of knowing that does not pass through the rational mind, but arrives somewhere older and quieter and more certain. He said, "I knew immediately that was my mother, like an intuition." His adoptive mother, Julia, said something that deserves to be held carefully. She said, "I never thought I was his only mother. She is his mother, and I am his mother too." That sentence is the whole lesson of everything we have been carrying through this story. Said plainly, without drama, by a woman who had every reason to feel threatened and chose instead to feel expanded. Who understood that love is not a finite resource that must be protected from competition. Who raised a child with the explicit understanding that the love of an adoptive parent does not cancel the love of a birth parent, and does not need to, and is not diminished by the existence of the other. Robin said the reunion was not about blame. Not about the years of wondering, the imposter syndrome, the moments of feeling like he was living someone else's life, by accident. It was about understanding. About finding the missing piece, not to replace anything, but to complete a picture he had always known was incomplete. He stood in front of a woman he had never met and somehow already knew, and what passed between them was not a beginning. It was a continuation of something that had never actually stopped, something that had been running underground for 27 years, patient as a river beneath winter ice, waiting for the season to change. Back in Hawkman, Badao sets down the photograph, not forever. She will pick it up again tomorrow morning. But for a moment, she sets it on her knee and looks out the east-facing window at the light coming in, and there is something in her face that is not quite peace, but is something adjacent to it. The quality of a person who has not given up, who has decided, in the face of all evidence that giving up would be reasonable, to keep the window open, to keep saying the name, to keep believing that the world is connected in ways we cannot always see, and that sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, the connection finds its way through. Thang's message traveled from Austria to a screen in District 12 and found a woman who recognized a face. A photograph traveled from a house in America to a room in Saigon and found a mother who recognized her son. A young man walked from one end of a country to the other and found the woman whose face his own face carries. These things happen, not because the universe is organized to deliver happy endings on a reliable schedule, but because people refuse to stop looking. Because love, when it is genuine, does not accept silence as a final answer. Because somewhere between the sending of a message and the receiving of it, between the setting down of a photograph and the picking it up again, between the closing of one door and the opening of the next, something moves, something connects. Something that was lost finds, if not its way home, then at least a sign that home is still there. Still waiting, still holding the door. Badao picks up the photograph again. She points to the face. She says the name. Is there someone in your life you have been meaning to reach out to? Someone you lost touch with, not because of any real ending, but simply because time passed, and the moment never felt quite right. And if that person heard your voice today, after all this time, what do you think they would say?